Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Mark Speeder. The U.S. national debt, it's hovering around $30 trillion. It's hit 100% of the US GDP. So how did we end up here and what happens now? Joining me to have a conversation about this is James Peregoy, no stranger to this program. James is co-manager of the Ave Maria Bond Fund and the Ave Maria Undiscovered Fund. He's also a research analyst responsible for fixed income research and trading functions. And he's responsible for equity trading functions of the mutual funds. And he is with Ave Maria Mutual Funds, as I mentioned. James, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hey, Marcus. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm very well, thank you. And it's always great to reconnect with you. So we've got this great question of the U.S. national debt. And many people don't quite know how best to navigate this. What's a good starting point for this conversation?
Yeah, I think it is a serious problem, but it's likely not one that would produce a catastrophe overnight. As you mentioned, we hit 100% of GDP or publicly held national debt equal to GDP, which is a milestone of sorts, not a good one. That topic came up in the news a few months ago, but has since faded from the headlines. So I think it warrants further discussion. It's important to keep in mind that GDP it represents our total economic activity. So when debt reaches parity with that, it may be harder and harder to dig ourselves out of that hole. So I'm glad we can revisit this topic.
The debt surpassing the GDP, there are a few things that are going to happen as a result of it. So as of late July last year, what do we know about this?
Yeah, so it hit $32 trillion. That's our publicly held debt. And I think there's also a moral discussion to be had about this. How did we end up here? The moral dilemma being that our spending today may be putting undue burden on future generations by leaving them with the cumbersome national debt load. Additionally, we may be leaning on this as a crutch to avoid trade-offs. So we have various entitlement programs and defense, and we promise a lot of things that we don't fully have the resources to pay those immediately. And then the final thing I would say is the U.S. has held the reserve currency status for a while now. Since World War II about. And so this has given us, blessed us with a lower borrowing cost than typical and the ability to regularly overspend. So we should aim to be responsible and not abuse that power.
One of the great concerns that everyone listening has about this issue is we're just taking on more and more debt and therefore sloughing that debt onto our children, unborn or otherwise. And that's a bill that's going to be passed on for who knows how many generations. And these are people who can't even vote yet, and they're being born into this debt. So share with us about the moral dimension of this.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, it comes out of some kind of complacency. We borrow in times of crisis. So I guess the last big one would have been COVID. Businesses were shut down, and so some amount of stimulus was necessary, and we tend to overdo that. And then once we come out of that situation, the recovery starts to be underway. We tend to not give up those benefits so readily. And then additionally, I'd say the political culture and a rise of populism has also contributed to this issue as more and more candidates promise benefits to voters in a way to win votes, and it's hard to be the one candidate that doesn't make those promises. He's less likely to get elected that way.
Have we been responsible about it, though? Making promises about benefits and tax relief and services and entitlement programs, but do we have the resources to match those promises?
No, and I think our annual deficit kind of speaks to this. So in 2025, the U.S. government brought in about $5.2 trillion in revenue, but it spent $7 trillion. So it came up short by about $1.8 trillion, and that's about 6% of our GDP. and that's not that's high. It's a way over the baseline of what you would expect in a non-recessionary period. It is down as an annual deficit as a percentage of GDP from COVID, where it was 15%, but still you would expect it to be closer to a baseline, closer to 0%.
Is that normal?
No. So yeah, 6%, like I said, after, if we revisit the late 90s and early thousands, we actually ran 4 consecutive years of budget surpluses, and that was aided by kind of we had some productivity growth from the internet, and then we had the restraint and fiscal discipline to keep spending flat. And since that period, that has kind of become the new normal, but it shouldn't be.
And that's upsetting. And undoubtedly, everyone listening, they have a further question, which is very simply, how fast is that debt accumulating?
Yeah, so we're at just under 32 trillion in publicly held debt currently. We hit the first 10 trillion at about 2011. The next 10 trillion in cumulative debt took 9 years to reach in 2020, and the next 10 trillion, so 30 trillion, took another 6 years to reach in 2026. So it's accelerating. It is cause for concern, but like I said earlier, not for panic.
How much of our present political culture now is developing to that? We have such a populistic system of politics now that's not thinking of long-term policy and the general good of the American people.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said before, it's hard for with a government and large bureaucratic organizations. It's hard for any one area to kind of give up the budget that they had, and so that can contribute to it. Like I said, the populism, candidates overpromising. And then also, I guess, when you look at just the annual budget of what the government spends money on, about 60% of government outlays are for mandatory programs. So that would be tied to entitlement programs and benefits. These are things that are hard to touch, hard to reduce. You would have a good amount of kind of fervor attached to that. Then 27% is discretionary spending. So this is stuff Congress can amend. Defense happens to be a major component, and so in a kind of geopolitically fraught time we live in right now, that's also kind of one that might be hard to touch. And then what is concerning is that interest now represents about 13% of the total outlays, and that if we don't get things under control, that could continue rising, and it could crowd out other areas of spend that might be necessary.
So you've talked briefly about where the federal government is spending that money. The question really now is, how do we get out of this problem?
Yeah, and there's no easy way to do it. We have done it in the past, and then also, there is no absolute indebtedness level where we can predict that, we would start having immediate consequences. You can look at Japan, for example, which has 200% plus of debt to GDP. But there's a few levers you can pull when we think about that debt to GDP ratio. If you look at the denominator, GDP, pro-growth reform, and that kind of thing to grow the economy would make the debt smaller in proportion to that. And then if you look at the numerator, getting back to working towards budget surpluses would help a lot.
I've been talking with James Peregoy. He's a manager of funds with Ave Maria Mutual Funds, and we're talking, I want to highlight here, find out how Ave Maria Mutual Funds are doing and what they're doing at AveMariaMutualFunds.com, and consider their bond fund, the Ave FX, and the Ave Maria Undiscovered Fund, Ave UX. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.